Well, this is one of those movies that I feel like needs a director's cut. It really needs a director's cut. Um, I really wasn't gonna talk about this movie in a review, but I'd seen it recently. I'd heard about this movie before, and I didn't really know too much about it. But knowing apparently it's it was labeled as a horror movie, and this is the horror cast, so why not talk about it? So Disturbing Behavior. This movie came out in 1998, and you can definitely tell this movie came out in 1998 because this is one of the most 90s movies I've ever seen. Like, it's one of those movies where it feels like you've stepped into a time capsule, and all the way back in your just back in the 90s all of a sudden, because mainly because of just the music, like the hairstyles, and other things. It's just the way, of course, like the way it's shot. It feels like very much like a 90s movie. But this movie has a really, really interesting premise. And basically, the main character in this movie, Steve, he moves to this like small island town. I guess it's supposed to be in the movie. I know this movie was shot in Canada, actually. I think it was like Vancouver, but the movie takes place in Seattle, Washington. So it takes place in this like small island town in Seattle, Washington, and it follows this guy Steve, who is moving to this town after some tragic event happened with his brother, which the movie does not really go into. Basically, Steve is introduced to this town, the townspeople, and he's going to this new high school. And basically, we see that this high school, it has a lot of these different like cliques. Steve is introduced to this high school in this town, and this high school has all these different cliques, and this town is very like it's you find out it's basically kind of in a way like run by one of these cliques, which is it was the Blue Ribbon or the Blue whatever they were called. It was basically a group of jocks, pretty much, that sort of in a lot of ways like they run the high school, and they also kind of run the town as well, because the town is just kind of that they're kind of like the main. It's almost like the main thing that keeps the town going in a way. Is this group of jocks. But I mean, we see all the different other cliques as well, which don't really play a role in the movie. They're just kind of there to establish like the setting and what the fact that this town is kind of focused on is kind of just focused on these different social circles, and it's very important like which clique you actually belong to. So, like I said, the movie follows Steve, and he's basically ends up befriending this guy who's like a stoner, who is kind of investigating what's really going on with this town, because there is a mystery with what's happening here. There is like this big kind of this big conspiracy in a way with what's going on in this town, because there's a lot of because it's very weird how it's like I said, very much run by this group of jocks. Steve's stoner friend, before Steve comes to this town, like he's pretty much been looking into these people, and there's a lot of weird things going on. Like, they have these meetings basically like deciding who's going to be joining what group and why they're going to be joining the group. It's like a PTA meeting that he's like spying on, and the parents and the teachers are like, they all convene to basically like decide where their kids belong and what they're going to be doing. It's very like that in and of itself is very weird, and it makes you question like, okay, what, like, of course this is it's supposed to be a commentary, like social commentary. Like, this kind of stuff does happen in real life, although not as crazy as what's shown here. But there's definitely something more going on, because there's this one guy who's running the meeting, and you can tell he's kind of like the head honcho. Like, he's one of the people that helps to decide like who like the fate of each of these kids in a way, like where they're going to go, like what clique they belong to, and what influence they're going to have over what happens in the town and what happens in this school. And this guy is, I'll just say he's definitely, he ends up being like the main antagonist. But I am going to have to spoil some things about the movie just to kind of give my opinion here. But basically, Steve starts hanging out with the stoners, and eventually the guy who's like the main antagonist is like, kind of pressuring Steve into saying like, you need to join one of these groups. You need to figure out where you belong in this town. And eventually, like, what happens after Steve is shown by his stoner friend, like, that this stuff is happening, that there's these weird secret meetings kind of happening. Right after that, the day after that, the guy who was Steve's stoner friend ends up becoming one of the jocks, just all of a sudden out of nowhere. And that's really what makes Steve want to investigate what's really going on here. Now, we see some weird stuff happening with some of the jocks, and that they're all of a sudden their eyes start to turn red at times, like they're the freaking Terminator or something, and they just start beating up people. Like they just go out of control. They just start just getting into fights. And in the beginning of the movie, one of them kills somebody because they just go out of control, and we already know just right from the beginning something is wrong here, because one of the cops basically, once he finds out one of the jocks had killed this person, he pretty much looks the other way and lets the guy just shoot his buddy, and is like, it's okay, just, well, don't worry about it, pretty much. And like I said, we already know there's something more going on. So basically, Steve and Katie Holmes' character, because she's in this movie, they end up investigating like what happened to their friend. And come to find out that what's going on is that a lot of the kids in this town are being controlled by this brain chip, or some kind of brain chip that's been implanted in them that is controlling them and making them do these things and making them act, pretty much making them conform to what the main antagonist wants, and also what other adults in the town want, because they want them to act a certain way. So the brain chip basically mind controls them and makes them do these things, which is a really interesting concept. But yeah, that's basically what this movie is about. Once, of course, like I said, once Steve finds out his friend has become one of these jocks, he looks more into this and finds out that this is what's really going on, and basically tries to get out of this town. And also, at the same time, tries to stop what the main antagonist of what he's trying to do, because, of course, we find out he was like a former neuroscientist or something like that, and he's, and that's how he's able to do all this. Once we find out that's what's really happening, it's like, it feels like it's like a rush to the end. Like, okay, now we need to do this. Now we're here. Now we're over there. And the movie doesn't really go much into like fleshing out the actual this experiment, I suppose, or whatever's going on with this with the main antagonist and what he really wants, like why he's doing this. We don't really get a lot of development with certain character relationships, because it's very clear that there was supposed to be some kind of a romantic relationship between Steve and Katie Holmes' character. And there was just supposed to be more scenes between Stevens and his stoner friend, and maybe some other characters as well, that just got cut, because this is one of those movies you watch and you're like, there's definitely stuff that was cut out here. And I didn't even know that there was a kind of director's cut that existed before watching this movie. It's like I said, it's just one of those movies you watch and you're like, okay, there's definitely cuts here, because this just seems very strange and disjointed, especially I would say in the latter half of the movie. It feels like they were really like rushing to the end, because there is one part of this movie where Steve basically just goes to one of the former places that the main antagonist worked at to try to find out like more about him or what's really going on, basically. And they end up like finding his daughter there, and it feels like it was kind of like a dropped plot point. Like it's brought up and never brought up again. Like they go to this place and then they leave, and it just like goes right into the climax of the end of the movie, and it's like not really focused on at all. It's very strange. It feels like there's definitely some things there that was cut. And I did come to find out later that there were quite a few different scenes that were cut out. There was this one character in the movie who is basically pretending to be an idiot, and he actually knows more about like what's really going on in the town, and he's one of the people that ends up helping Steve. And there's a scene where he's basically like explaining the reason why this is even happening in the first place, like why the main antagonist has this, like, is mind controlling these kids. And that was cut. And the reason why it was cut was because the studio thought that it was too boring, which is really dumb. Like, studio interference is one of the main things the things I hate the most about when it comes to like a director trying to get across their vision for a movie. Sometimes there are very few instances where I actually agree with studio interference, like maybe 3% of the time. 97, 98% of the time, it's not necessary. And this is one of those cases where I feel like the director had this was supposed to be a much deeper movie than what we got in the actual cut of the movie, like the theatrical cut. Because I watched this movie and I was like, I liked it, but I felt like there was supposed to be so much more than what was shown on screen. And I always feel kind of vindicated in a way when I come to find out that is definitely the case, because I found that there's basically like there's a lot of these deleted scenes that got put up on YouTube, I guess, that came from DVD copies of the movie, and I think it got put on the Blu-ray as well, where we have the deleted scenes from the movie. And there are fan edits of this movie that kind of add in the deleted scenes again, but we don't have an actual director's cut of this movie. People have been trying to get a director's cut of this movie to be released, but for some reason the studio is just adamantly against it. They don't want it to come out. I really wish that Shout Factory or like Scream Factory or whatever could put out a director's cut. They have put out a Blu-ray copy of the movie, but it's not the director's cut. And I don't know if we're ever going to get one. I kind of doubt it, because this movie has more so like a cult following. So I feel like the studio's justification, if they don't, put out a director's cut, would be, well, there's just not enough demand or something like that. So I just don't see it happening. I mean, we did end up getting director's cuts for movies like The Exorcist 3, which I'm not a fan of that cut in the movie, I'll be totally honest, but I am glad that it exists. And with this movie, I feel like if we got a director's cut of this movie, we'd have pretty much the definitive version of the movie, and people would hold it in a higher regard, because the way the movie is now, it's not a bad movie. It's still a good movie. I feel like a lot of what the director wanted to say still got through in the movie, but I feel like it would be significantly better if we got the director's cut, because I found out that like 20 minutes or 25 minutes of this movie has been cut, which is, honestly quite a bit when you think about like what those 20 minutes could have done. I mean, I've seen the different scenes. There are scenes that kind of explain more about what happened with Steve's brother, because that's another thing in this movie that we don't really get too much of. We get these brief flashes of like what happened, and that's it. We don't really get a solid explanation. In the director's cut, or in the deleted scenes, I guess, we actually get a full explanation of what really happened. Same thing where, when it comes to character relationships, there was actually a romance between Steve and Katie Holmes' character, and we get that in the cut scenes of the movie, just like we get the explanation for why this is happening in the first place, which is like, why would you cut that out? Like, I don't care if you're bored by it. It explains, like, it's an important scene that explains like what's really going on in the movie, that explains why the plot is even happening. Why is it cut? It feels like there is just not a lot of character development with certain characters. They feel somewhat one-dimensional, where it feels like that there could have been more done with certain characters. And that's kind of the case, because there were cut scenes with Steve and his family, because we don't really get too much of that in the theatrical cut. We just get like very brief scenes between them, so we don't have any idea of what his relationship with his family even is, or specifically his sister as well, because it's implied that Steve does have some relationship with his sister, but we only get like a few scenes with them. I feel like those were probably other scenes that were cut out of the movie, but there's also scenes cut out between Steve and his father, like having conversations where his father kind of explains like why he's doing what he's doing, or like why they moved there and stuff like that. Like, why is that cut? Another scene that, where there's a scene with him and Katie Holmes on a boat that kind of goes by strangely fast, and I felt like it was definitely a scene that should have been expanded on, where Steve says, yeah, my brother died and I moved here because of that. And Katie Holmes' character is just like, oh, well, I'm sorry. And then the scene and that's it. And I found out that there was actually that, because when I watched the movie, I'm like, this feels like it was supposed to be a longer scene. And guess what? It was a longer scene. There was more to this scene. Why is this cut? I cannot get over the amount of cuts that, once I knew about them, I just can't get over how much was cut out of this movie and how it could have been such a better movie. Like I said, there were fan edits of the movie that exist with these cut scenes, but it's no longer on YouTube, and I don't know where you can find it now. Unfortunately, now we just have to pretty much rely on Shout Factory, Scream Factory, or somebody else to release an actual director's cut for this movie. But as the movie is, it's, like I said, it's a fairly decent movie, if not of very much a missed opportunity in a lot of ways. And it's not the director's fault, and I know it's not the director's fault. I fully blame the studio for this, because a lot of what we get with this movie is very, very surface level. It's fairly reminiscent of movies. If you've seen movies like The Faculty or The Stepford Wives, very similar to that, where it kind of presents this kind of just seemingly on the surface like perfect community, but then you find out there's dark secrets as to what's really going on, and there's this really weird reason, or these strange things happening as to why this seems like it's just this perfect community. And I feel like a lot of what the movie is trying to say is it was supposed to be like a commentary on societal like conformity. Because in one of the deleted scenes, we found out that the reason why this was happening was because one of the kids was drunk driving one night and had run somebody over, and this was kind of the catalyst as to what ended up happening in the movie with the experiment, where they wanted to just create perfect kid that would never like do something like that again, but at the cost of like their own individuality, basically, where they would just be perfect, like kind of like machines in a way. So it's really interesting, and I feel like it could have been gone much more into. I know it was, but I'm just judging the theatrical cut, and the theatrical cut presents these ideas, but doesn't really go much into them. And same thing with the characters. We have characters that seem like really interesting characters, but are not gone too much into, and I know they're gone more into in the actual director's, what would be the director's cut of the movie. So if we get a director's cut, I will probably, if we ever do one day, I'll probably do another review where I review the director's cut or something, but this is for the theatrical cut. And like I said, it's a good movie. I recommend it. I think it has an interesting enough premise to check out, to watch the movie, but it could have been so much more. So that all being said, guys, I'm going to have to give the movie 1 thumbs up. It was good, but not great. I do recommend checking out the movie, and especially looking into the director's cut. There's a video by a guy called Good Bad Flicks that goes into the director's cut, so I recommend that video if you want to know more. But that all being said, guys, until next time, I will see you all later.